Welcome to Two Homes. This podcast explores the relationship between our inner world and the systems we live within, from our bodies and beliefs to the businesses, destinations, and environments we shape. Because sustainability that isn't embodied doesn't last, and well-being that stays at the surface level doesn't change much at all. Together, we'll explore what it really takes to build systems that support people, places, and the planet over the long term. From leadership and organizational culture to the hidden patterns that shape how we live, work, and travel. This is an invitation to look a little deeper and to discover how meaningful change often starts closer to home than we think. Welcome to Two Homes. I'm your host, Sarah Rhodes, and today we're getting a little bit more personal because people are at the core of everything we do. This is something that I've been discovering and learning about myself, and then noticing how much this shows up in culture, in how we work, in how we live. And I think as well, because I've had the perspective of living in another culture, in another society that works at one pace, and then moving back to Sydney and living and working here in a totally different pace. So last year, when I became a NIA movement teacher, NIA being a kind of holistic somatic dance, a lot of people thought I had done a total career change. But the truth is, it's really just adding another layer, another skill set into the spectrum of what I do. And even from many, many years ago, I would say at least a decade ago, I began starting my workshops with a small mindfulness meditation, because the relationship between our bodies and the work that we do is inseparable. We are who shows up at work. We are with us all the time, and we're interacting consciously and subconsciously through our bodies all the time. So this episode is called "What if your body is your first sustainability audit?" And I hope that hits. I think that this is a really important place to look. And as well as the day-to-day, I work with a lot of sustainability professionals. I work in the heart of Sydney, this big, busy city with a lot of professionals, a lot of leaders, and there's a lot of burnout. And I used to think that burnout was just sheer exhaustion, but there's so much more to it than that. So let's have a bit of a look at why things might be showing up how they're showing up, why we might be experiencing this burnout. I find myself having this conversation over and again lately, that we are really treading a fine line, that here in Sydney and probably in a lot of big cities, there is no space. I notice this in my home life. My neighbors are all up before the sun is up. And it really is this little bit of an insight for me about this hustle, this busyness. And if we stay busy, if we keep moving, then perhaps we don't have to feel things too deep. There was a 2014 research project conducted by psychologists at the University of Virginia and Harvard University that was published in the journal Science. And the study was titled "Just Think: The Challenges of the Disengaged Mind." And it found that people preferred to receive an electric shock rather than spend 15 minutes alone with their thoughts. So the key outcome of that were 67% of men chose to give themselves at least one electric shock during the 15-minute quiet period that they were designated, and 25%, and 25% of women chose to give themselves at least one electric shock. So they were given the context of the shock before the study started, and then it was a test to see who was able to sit quietly and be comfortable, maybe not entirely comfortable, but be able to endure or enjoy 15 minutes of quiet time sitting in a clean blank room. And they wanted to test whether people would choose a negative stimulus over no stimulus at all. And I think that's really interesting. I think it would be fascinating to see what that test looked like now. After more than a decade more time exposure to things like social media, to being constantly on. Yeah, I think this is really fascinating. We don't want to feel what's inside, and we don't have to. There is so much to distract us. We can be busy at work. We can be busy on our phones. We can be on our phones playing games and scrolling social media while we're walking, while we're on the bus. And it's fascinating just to see this play out, that it's hard, right? It's hard because there is millions, possibly billions of dollars going into technology and apps to get you hooked, but it's working because we're addicted to it, and it is, absolutely a numbing out place, but it's not a recharge place. So it's not helping us reduce our burnout. If anything, it's making it worse. And so when we look at sustainability and why it seems such a far reach, I think it's because we're already operating on this hamster wheel for the most part. So many people operating on the hamster wheel, not wanting to feel our feelings. So I think I've shared a little bit about this on here before, that NIA was something that I started during COVID, and I'd met the person who is now an extremely good friend of mine just a mere 6 months before I originally left Cambodia to move to Sydney just before COVID. We've heard that bit in episode 1. Didn't know that was going to happen. Anyway, so I met my beautiful friend and knew she was a dance teacher. We clicked instantly, but I didn't want to dance because at that point I was very much probably one of those people I was just describing. I don't think I would have taken electric shock, but I would have found it really hard to sit quietly for 15 minutes. In fact, when I lived in Cambodia, quite a number of people I know would go to 10-day silent Vipassana retreats, and I thought, I can be silent, but I can't not read, not listen to a podcast, not do yoga. Like, I can't just be still. Thankfully that's changed a lot now. I think I'm still not drawn to it, but I think I could do a Vipassana now. My Nia story, yes. So I didn't want to go, and the biggest part really was that I felt self-conscious. I felt self-conscious about dancing with other people. What I'd heard from some people who raved about it, by the way, I thought it was a bit like ecstatic dance, and that did not appeal to me in any way at all. And I thought that it was going to be a lot of free flow, like I would have to figure out how to dance, and that also didn't appeal to me. So what ended up happening was when I'd moved to Sydney and COVID began, my friend started teaching online, and she knew that I was in a really hard place. I was living by myself in a city where I knew 2 people who lived extremely far away, and I was not able to see them during that time because of lockdowns and things. My work in sustainability and tourism pretty much vanished overnight, and I gave up a really good fight. And hello, burnout. We'll come back to that in a minute. And so she's like, well, what else are you going to do? You've got nothing else to do. Come dance. And so I did. And I'm so, so grateful because that really became my lifeline. Really did. 2020 and 2021, that was one bit of structure that I could rely on. And what I also came to realize much later, because let's face it, it was just surviving day by day, sometimes hour by hour back then. that when I thought that I wasn't really achieving anything and I felt like I was being left behind by friends who were doing MBAs and other amazing things during COVID, I realized I was actually building something. I was just doing it in a slower and, dare I say, more sustainable way. Because that was a time where I really had to sit with my body, when I really went in and started to feel a lot of things I hadn't felt before. And it was super uncomfortable. And if I was given a choice not to go through that, of course, I wouldn't have gone through that. But I think the combination of self-inquiry and movement is a powerful one. And so that's why I'm always going to be grateful for that time, because it was hard and it was horrible. And it was illuminating and it was joyful, and not in very nice equal doses. But I had those glimmers, and the Nia movement provided those glimmers where I thought, okay, actually, my body is strong. I feel some confidence here. I feel some flexibility, and I feel like things are starting to shift. In addition to that, I was not doing an MBA, but I was learning a lot. I devoured podcasts and I would listen while I was going for a walk. And that movement of walking helped me integrate what I was learning. So it wasn't a formal education, but it was a very self-driven education. And when I'd get to the end of all my preferred podcasts, and because I was walking a lot, I would dig deeper and I would listen to some things perhaps that I wouldn't have listened to by choice. And so whilst in the moment I felt like I was wasting so much time, I realize now what a gift it was. I realized that had I just been watching Netflix, I did watch all of Netflix, like literally all of Netflix as well. I'm sure some of you can resonate with me on that one. But had I not been moving, had I not been learning something new, I don't think I would be in the place that I'm in now, with what I believe is a very healthy, regulated, flexible nervous system with a level of self-confidence that I've never experienced before. And now it also means that when things aren't quite right, I trust my body and I tune in and I listen to what it has to say. So would I be surviving and coping okay if I hadn't done this, if I was disconnected from my inner home in the way that I probably was for so many decades before? Sure, I'd still be fine. But what I can remember in the way I operated before and how I operate now, I remember waking up tired every day. I remember rushing, skipping breakfast, working through lunch, feeling like I'd never get it all done. I remember taking on extra stress to try and protect my team at work from their stress, and not being able to speak up for myself, not being able to voice my opinions, needs, feelings until it was too late, until I was sick or distraught or just so burnt out and tired that I couldn't do anything. And I remember this cycle of I would get to that point of utter devastation, then ask for help, then not get it, and then double down on my self-righteousness that I was the only one who was working so hard. And that if you had to do something well, if you had to do something right, do it yourself. Definitely brought up with that mantra. And definitely some wild perfectionistic tendencies. This is when I wasn't listening to my body. And so, yeah, I'm being a little bit vulnerable here. I'm sharing way more than I intended to. And maybe this is a little bit confronting if you haven't had a conversation with your body lately. Sometimes it's not easy when emotions come in, but this is the truth, and this is the real expression, the best way that I can do it in this moment today. And I think we are just walking on such a fine line. And as a result, we're not able to dig as deep as we could to get the benefits that we could get and the potential that's available. So the body is always, and the nervous system is always trying to keep us safe. And I think this is why sometimes new things, change, admitting our vulnerabilities can be so confronting. The nervous system wants to protect us from feeling vulnerable, from feeling exposed, like maybe we don't know enough about sustainability. So we put some barriers up instead, or we avoid it, or we use the certificate as a shield of, well, we've done enough. But what if we turned inwards? Body is always giving us data, and a lot of the time we're not listening. So what does it start to feel like to start paying attention to that? Let's shift back to some maybe safer, practical territory here. Thank you for holding the space for me to be a little bit vulnerable there. In my sustainability work, I'm frequently in environments where there's such a big gap between what's written on paper and what's actually happening. It's a huge gap. And if I'm to be completely honest, my body gets angry. I feel it. I feel the frustration for this incongruency between what's being said and what's being done. I have a strong sense of justice. And when I see something that feels like it's not equitable or true, I can feel that. I feel it in my chest. When most of the time we're trained to deliver reports, to follow frameworks. When we tune into our body, we can find that disconnect. We can find the gap. I'm sure you can recall a situation where you've said something, but you've perhaps felt that it didn't quite align, or perhaps you've felt scared of not having an answer, and so you've made something up to buy time to go find the answer. Our body is often quicker to react. Our body is often quicker to tell the truth than what our mind can. Our mind is just such a small part of things, yet we outsource. We give all of the control to our mind, and often we override things that are going on underneath. We override feeling burnt out, feeling perhaps helpless that we can't do more, or that we're not doing more, that our workplaces aren't doing more, our cities, our governments, our friends, our family. And the body holds all of this, even if we don't acknowledge it. And so I've been realizing recently that all that I went through during COVID, as uncomfortable as it was a real turning point. But it's still impacting me today. And I feel like as a collective, we haven't fully transmuted that. We haven't fully processed that time. We kind of got back up and dusted ourselves off and almost carried on as if nothing had happened. But something huge happened that affected every single one of us. And the return to busyness, perhaps with a splash of numbing after 2 years of perhaps quite a lot of numbing. I feel like now that we prefer to be busy so we don't have to reflect on that, we don't have to process that, but the body is still hanging on to it. For me, and I'm sure for other people, some other people as well, it was a turning point. It has changed the way I relate to so much in the world. I used to be quite rigid. I used to get frustrated that there wasn't more action happening. Now I can see there are many different ways. Now I can see as well that we are part of an evolution. We can't change overnight what took decades to destroy. Through movement, not only did my body become more flexible, but I found my mind was becoming more flexible as well. That I wasn't hanging on so tightly to that sense of justice. Yes, it's still there. I think it needs to be to do the kind of work that I do, but not in a way that was harming me, because sometimes our rigidity harms us more than it helps shift things. And through movement, I became more balanced, physically more grounded, and emotionally more grounded. I really value that I have the opportunity to hold space for people. And I love creating those spaces where workplaces can join together and talk about sustainability in a meaningful way. And I feel like this movement has enabled me to hold more of that, to be able to show up and bring more of that for myself and for my clients. And I also feel that it helped me to integrate new ideas that information alone wouldn't have done. It talked about listening to so many podcasts and walking. It talked about dancing. And I truly believe that because of this, I've been able to gradually implement and integrate new ideas rather than just listening and thinking, oh, that was a good idea. I can take it and create it into something of my own. The amount of times when I'm dancing or walking that I have an idea that just hits me like a lightning bolt, like it happens more often than you might realize. And sometimes those things are small, like, oh, I got to send a message to this client or that contact or this friend. And sometimes it's bigger, like, hey, I think I'm going to hold a plastic free July event this year for the first time in Sydney. And that feels exciting. And sometimes it's listening to a new piece of information or the same information, but almost with new ears. Because our minds aren't the only thing. Our minds are not even the main thing processing this information. Our body and our nervous system is doing the work here. And we need to start to have a better conversation between them. So if, like me, you heard me talking about dance and were like, yeah, nah, that's great for you, Sarah, but I am not at all interested. All of my preconceived ideas about Nia were pretty wrong. And so it's not like a static dance, and it's not all fluid and free form. And it's also not something to be self-conscious about. And you don't need to be a dancer, though I now consider myself a dancer. I didn't at the beginning. You don't need to be a performer. In fact, in the early days during COVID, I would join the online classes and leave my camera off, full disclosure. It took me a while to warm up. But I do encourage you to give something like this a go. It doesn't need to be exactly this, but there are so many amazing things available to us now that involve the whole system. Things like somatic yoga, mindfulness, breath work. But I'll speak to Nia because it's what I know well. And in Nia, there are 6 foundations of Nia, and they are stability, that groundedness that I was talking about, agility, the ability to move quickly, to adapt, to be quick on your feet, quick in your mind, mobility, to be able to move and adapt, almost go with the flow. Physically, it might be like getting up and down off the floor with ease. Mentally, it might be looking at things from a different viewpoint. Flexibility, we all want flexible bodies, and this can translate into flexible thinking, non-dualistic. There are so many creative possibilities available. It's never just this thing or another thing. And stillness. Stillness, something that so many of us struggle with. And that's just the foundation, and there's so much more. When we can connect with our body, when we can pay attention to what our body is telling us, when we can strengthen that relationship, then I think it has the potential to really become a superpower, really support us in how we show up. I've lost so much self-consciousness. I think that's why I'm able to now hop on and do a podcast and just go, I know that whoever needs to hear this will hear this. I have stability. I'm supported. And I know that I'm not alone, that we're all connected. And that's come through from this too. And what I learned when I started teaching, which I notice in my sustainability work as well, the teacher always learns more than the student does. So I've definitely learned a lot more about my body and my nervous system in the year and a bit since I started teaching than I did before. Because every class, every workshop strengthens, it tests, get questions. And so this is something that I strongly encourage in sustainability as well, is if you can teach, if you can take something, the content of this podcast, a workshop session I've delivered for your team, and create teachers within your group, the people teaching will learn more. They'll embody more. So even though I mention walking as well during those COVID years, and I still walk a lot. Now I don't take my phone with me. I enjoy disconnecting and just being. That is all. The difference between walking, which is fantastic, and Nia, which is somatic, that does different things. The way Nia is designed is that it involves not just the body, it also involves the mind, the spirit, and the emotions. And that's where something like this can be a little bit confronting because emotions bring up a lot in people. And even though it only takes around 90 seconds to process an emotion if we stay present with it, sometimes it doesn't seem like that and we don't want to face it. But by incorporating the mind, body, spirit, and emotions, Nia has a powerful way of alchemizing things and processing things that I've never experienced any other way. And I really just think that my sustainability work and that sustainability more generally can benefit so much from this. For a long time now, I've felt that if we can take better care of ourselves, if we can learn to love ourselves, then taking care of the planet becomes almost the default. When we revere ourselves and pour love onto ourselves, take care, nourish our minds through mindful consumption, nourish our bodies through sustainable, regenerative, organic food, through movement, sunlight, nature. These are not luxuries. These are how we were built. This is how we're all meant to live. We are nature, and yet we somehow think that we are other than nature. When we reconnect with nature, then the very virtue of that is that we take care of ourselves and we take care of those around us and we take care of the planet that is holding us and nurturing us. This is really a huge core principle of the Two Homes podcast, our inner world and the outer world. We're not separate. And when we embody sustainability, when we integrate it, when we realize that it's not an add-on, it's how we can do things, there can be so much joy and connection as well as impact that comes from that. We're not separate. It takes more work to be separate than it does to be integrated. It takes more work to fight nature than it does to accept that we are nature. It takes more work to add sustainability on, to fight sustainability, than it does to flow with sustainability. And so when we're running, as so many of us are in these big, hectic cities where we're not attuned with ourselves, where we're running on urgency, fear, chronic pressure, deadlines, reports, the next one, do it when it's urgent, then other decisions become hasty, reduced. There's no room for anything more. When we change and when the system is regulated, then there's expansion. We slow down to speed up. We slow down to focus on more of what matters, and we stop doing the things that don't actually make a difference. What I've seen that beautifully represents this is when I see there are teams that take a pause, that collectively they problem solve, they talk about things, or they do movement together, yoga, or some mindfulness, or some gardening. These kind of teams are cohesive. It's not just an intellectual coming together for work, it is an integrated understanding of how they do things that matters, not just what they do, but how they do it, how they show up. And it's noticed and it's impactful. So at the end of the day, how we feel can be an indication of how meaningful we found the day. Instead of measuring tasks and how much we did and what's been reported on, yes, reporting is an integral part of what we need to do, but what if we felt as though the things we'd done weren't just a lot, but they were actually of a quality that garnered a sense of pride, a connection, a satisfaction, a knowing that it was a job well done. Not because it was a lot of things, but because it was something meaningful that connected, that united, that impacted, which benefits the business. Sustainable businesses are great businesses. They're profitable businesses. They're resilient businesses. The steadiness, the resilience, there's no fragility here. There's no tipping over the edge and everything is going to fall apart. No, it's steady, it's solid, it's integrated. So we measure carbon, water, and waste, but we don't measure depletion, disconnection, or the cost of fabricated urgency on the people doing the work. What could we change if we did? Thanks for really going there with me today. This one went a little bit deeper than I thought it would. But if you're listening to this and even just a tiny bit of it hit something that felt a little different in your body, then I'd invite you just to take a minute, a moment of inquiry, a gentleness, a softness to check in and see, what could you do if you weren't doing everything? What could you change? What would you prioritize differently? I know we don't have the luxury that I had during COVID. It's funny to refer to it as a luxury. But how can we use small pauses? How can you go inward before there's a crisis that forces it? This podcast is called Two Homes, our inner world and the outer system and the planet. It's all connected. They're not separate. If you or your team are burnt out, if you're disconnected, if you're running on empty, then that's a KPI. That's something we should be paying attention to. Because if that's out of whack, then everything else cascades from there. I think we've ignored that inner home for too long. I know I did. So now, if you're with me, we're going to start to visit it a little more often. Thank you for joining me on Two Homes. I'm your host, Sarah Rhodes, and I will see you next time.